I've been planning to write this video for a while, but the online drama over the new OGL with Wizards of the Coast has taken up a lot of the time, and the negativity has really affected me. I'm not going to comment on the OGL drama with Wizards of the Coast and all that. Everyone else is doing it for me. And if you want to see how everybody is handling Wizards of the Coast right now, here's a quick look into how that's working. And that's just medium style. It takes a lot for me to sour on a game. Usually when I pick one up, I know almost immediately that it's not very good or just not for me. Looking at you, 7th Sea 2nd Edition. Other games look great at the start, but they're super shallow, and my players and I grow tired of them quickly. Just ask Cody, Mike, or Mitch about Iron Kingdoms, and you'll know what I'm talking about. But a lot of games suffer a slow, lingering death as the quality of the products fall off. The original writers move on, or the designers get obsessed with a particular aspect of the game that the players don't really care about. Silver Age Sentinels, World of Darkness, and Deadlands, for example. That brings me to 5th edition. I've defended this game against detractors. I've caught flack for enjoying it, despite my focus on one of the oldest settings that they've never supported outside of some throwaway fan service. But looking at the latest books, the excitement I had for the fresh new version coming off the debacle of 4th edition is gone. To paraphrase a certain nautical specter, the adventures would not satisfy. The words of the new books turned to ash in my mouth. The company of fellow gamers could not satisfy my imagination. 5th edition has failed me. Now I know why. This game isn't without merit. Let me preface that. It's a very high fantasy adventure game where you start off quite strong and just go up from there. For a while. Even that seems to die off. Every edition does something well. Yes, even 4th. 1st edition was for people who wanted a simulation. Everything was tracked, counted, and had rules. 2nd edition made the game more accessible to the masses because it was prettier, the rules were more streamlined, and the art was its own topic. It got rid of the minutiae while keeping up with the spirit. 3rd edition was for math nerds. Everything was a +1, but it was so open now anyone could play anything. Everything was broken down into numbers, and for many it was easier to understand. 4th edition was a decent system for a computer game. And I think with the rise of online gaming, it's finally found its niche. Just a half-decade too late. BECME was the boiling pot of D&D. You started with the basic set, and it got you into the game. And then you left the dungeons with Expert, and then you started to shape your world with Companion, and you started to shape the multiverse with Master. And the game became very complex and very in-depth, and few people realized it until they were already well into the Master set. 5th edition is the game if you wanted to recreate Shadows over Mystara with all the power moves, hack and slash, and just happy, fun, stabby time. Then it started to become stale. The design team got lazy. How many races started with dark vision? It was almost a staple. Then the built-in spells for races started to become ever-present. Of the 4 racial abilities everyone got, most of them got dark vision and spells. At least as the new expansions kept coming. Need a new ability? Just give them more spells. Unless, of course, you're the poor DM trying to rein in magic so he can play in a Tolkien-style fantasy. Too many things were put in as bare bones and never touched. Look at weapons. Some of them got special abilities that got awesome with special feats. Others got nothing. Some, like the Trident, were flat out worse than similar options like the Spear. The Warhammer, Battle Axe, and Longsword were almost the same weapon. They gave us damage type for weapons, but never utilized those damage types with all but a handful of monsters. It was magic weapons to hurt, or nothing. What we thought was going to be a bare-bones core system begging to be expanded on remained a bare-bones core system. The lack of imagination and design choices really started to show later on when magic saturated the system. Tasha's gave us 6 subclasses for fighters, rogue, and barbarian, and every single one of them was just add spells to the martial types. Backgrounds could give you spells. Feats would let you start with cantrips. When players asked how to increase the efficiency of their characters, most online forums will tell them, take a feat that gives you spells, and here's the ones you need. The line between the classes became blurred as everything started to become mage-colored. When you have a low magic setting, or worse, when magical abilities give an in-universe social advantage, like in Glantry or Alphacia, you can see the problem. Hey look, my fighter can cast first-level spells because of my background. That makes me a noble. Couple this with the suggestion that everyone should be legal, regardless of setting, because otherwise players wouldn't have fun. What about the DM who built the damned game world? Change the game to fit the setting. Never change the setting to fit the game. Speaking of settings, anybody remember when they said with the onset of the DM's Guild that we would soon be able to make content for any of the classic settings? Only they just had to make a game book featuring that world first. For the longest, it was all Forgotten Realms all the time. Then they converted Ravenloft over by bolting some extra stuff onto the original module, and we got Ravenloft. Just Barovia, nobody else, but the guild jumped all over it. Then Ghosts of Saltmarsh hit in 2019. Greyhawk grognards everywhere rejoiced. Now, according to Wizards' own rules, the world of Orth was available for third-party creators.
Mansell, that's what we in the Royal Navy call a lie.
But no, Ghosts of Saltmarsh didn't count, despite firmly being set in Keoland with a decent background on the setting and the Scarlet Brotherhood. We got Spelljammer last year and Dragonlands, and we'll get Planescape in the last year of 5e. So out of 10 classic settings, we have 5 available. And 3 were released in the dying days of the edition. So let's talk about the settings we've been handed, or the scraps of the settings. First we get Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide, or SCAG, as there was much wailing and gnashing of teeth because it was short. And while it gave a passing guide to the rest of Faerun, it was a pale comparison to the Forgotten Realms campaign guide from 3rd edition, also by Wizards of the Coast. It's not like they can't make quality books that stand the test of time. But we went from a 320-page masterpiece for $50 to a 159-page Cliff Notes for $40. It's half the book for almost the same price. The other settings weren't much better. Von Richten's Guide to Ravenloft changes and updates the old Ravenloft into a modern look, and strips away much of what made it special. I'm not kidding about the stripping part. Many of the domains are mostly vignettes. It went from Hammer Horror to Goosebumps. Lots of edgy new character types that went out of fashion in the grimdark darkness of the grimdark 90s, and little actual horror. Either it was underdeveloped villains without a trace of an actual threat, or it was just a lazy or race gender swapped villain for reasons. And it's not like Ravenloft was short on female or minority villains. They flat out stole the head-swapping princess from Return to Oz in the original Ravenloft. The one that had all the heads waking up and screaming at Dorothy. You would remember it well if you saw it, because it would still haunt your dreams. They had classic villains available, but they chose to just flip existing ones. Lazy. That's going to be a word that comes up a lot in this video. The new domains were often little more than a paragraph, and it was up to the DM to fill in the blanks. One problem: horror is one of the hardest genres to write. If you want to do it right, you need to invoke terror in the reader, and that is no small task. Then we get to Spelljammer with its tiny little sourcebook, the tiny little monster manual, and its tiny little adventure. Okay, the adventure was about twice the size of an old school module, but then you realize the sourcebook is just 64 pages. That's it. 64. Not even the size of the Etruscan Gazetteer, and that was a notorious rush job. They made the books look larger by using a thicker page, almost cardstock. Together the 3 books are 192 pages, or the exact same count as Tasha's. If you're a player, you only need the source book, but they're going to force you to buy the monster manual, DM screen, and adventure that you will never run. And if multiple people buy into it, then you're going to have a lot of extra books lying around that will never get used. Not to mention most of the information isn't what you wanted. The ship combat is boring and impractical. They get lazy, and rather than giving you rules for ship-to-ship combat, they just say, ram the ships together and do a boarding action. No swapping broadsides with an Illithid Nautilus. No hiding in a nebula letting the Neogi spider ship pass overhead, and then pop up from behind and hit them with everything. Ships move at almost the same speed, so there's no running away. Even if your ship is faster, it's going to take forever to get far enough away from the other guy because you're only going 10 feet around faster. All the great science fiction scenes from your favorite movie? Forget it, because they can't be bothered to write those rules. No, the DM just has to fiat the entire time. The powers that be complain that the DMs are buying most of the books, but they're not actually giving the DMs the books that make it easier for them to run the damn game. Then we're on to experience the wonder of the expansive world of Dragonlands. Well, just dip our toe into it, because the actual world gets less than 10 pages of world exploration, outside the adventure that's most of the book. It gives you the rules for Kinder, but not for Gully Dwarves. There's new backgrounds that give you spells, and feat trees are back. Considering the impact that Dragonlance had on D&D, this was underwhelming. Dragonlance introduced new concepts that had never been seen before in the game. Restrictions on races in the setting, alignment segregated classes, putting pants on Larry Elmore's women. It was a huge shift on how we played. Yes, it was a bit generic fantasy by today's taste, but back then, when it was new, it was huge. The heavy restrictions on races that were in Dragonlance was a big thing. Something that the new book says to just remove by hand-waving out-of-setting races is just dimensional travelers. The last place you want to play a Dragonborn is Dragonlands. Good way to roll up a new character before you hit level 2. If you're playing in a setting, respect the setting. They have their own races and restrictions because that's what makes the setting interesting and different. If you turn everything into a kitchen sink, you kill the thing that makes it different. If you want to play a drow, you're not playing one in Krynn. I don't care how much you want to play your grimdark tiefling in Mystara, because that's not going to end well. Do you want to get vivisected by Glantrians? Because that's how you get vivisected by Glantrians. Everything seems to be stacked against the DMs. It was hard to challenge the players because there were few long-term threats. Instant death was a thing of the past. Best you could do was drop a player to 0 hit points, and the creatures that could do that automatically, you can count on one hand. Didn't kill the player, you still needed to save them, which meant somebody with a healing kit walked over and stopped the bleeding without a die roll, or just use a familiar to do it. Long-term effects were all but dropped. Yes, it's not fun to have your character be paralyzed for 10 turns, but what if you make it impossible to thwart the players even a little because it's hard to challenge them? You want to take a wizard alive? Don't bother grappling. You can't do anything covered in the rules to stop a wizard from casting a spell on their turn. That included tackling them to pin them to the ground. Wands don't run out of charges. Nothing runs out of charges as a general rule. Just wait, and it'll power back up. Sure, you can only have 3 powerful items attuned to you, but that's not much of a problem until you hit high level. Then we have to address the fact that there's not much fun in high-level play in 5th edition. You get all the cool abilities long before then, and the super high-level abilities are rarely worth slogging it out to get to. Many of them come at level 20, the last level they actually have rules for. It's not like the old days where you started to get responsibilities at certain levels and go get rewarded by being knighted or awarded with a title, because there's no domain rules. It's all murder hobo, all the time. This is what you get when you leave out the character development and world-building pillars from your pillars of gaming. Look at the official high-level adventures. Every one of them is a dungeon crawl. High-level play in Mystara saw you go up to build Fantasy Canada, go toe-to-toe with the Patron Immortal of Corruption, and go on the freaking Odyssey. Not a Odyssey, the Odyssey. The epic Greek adventure that was one guy away from a TPK. Gary Gygax could take pointers from the Greek poet Homer, who was the immortal patron of the total party kill. What examples of high-level play did we get in 5th edition? The last few levels of Dungeon of the Mad Mage and 2 short adventures and various anthologies? No epic level play. Even the adventure they set in the Hells was more of an homage to George Miller than Dante Allegro. You want epic level adventures? You're going to need more than just go into this cave and kill all the bad guys. Wait, did I say 3 pillars of adventuring? Because I meant 2. You had lots of combat in 5th edition. You had lots of opportunities to talk to people. But when it came to exploring, it was lacking. If you had a ranger, it was easy mode. That was one of the major flaws in the adventure Out of the Abyss. One ranger with Underdark as a favored terrain, and you've removed all the threat. Again, hearkening back to 5th edition's pillow-fisted nature. It's nigh impossible to run a survival game where food should be a major issue if one of the party members can cast Goodberry. A first-level spell negates one of the biggest dangers in The Lost City or Out of the Abyss. A first-level spell. Most exploration abilities just boil down to, you automatically pass. No threat to the character, no thrill for the player. I know what you're saying, Mr. Welch. And the answer is, my day job pays a lot better than pretty much anything in game design. I know what you're saying now. And no, tweaking the spell to fix the problem doesn't get around the fact that there's a problem. If you've got a bent rim that keeps messing up your tire, constantly replacing the tire isn't going to fix the problem. It's just going to patch further issues the initial problem is causing. Then there was all the issues of the people that came forward telling wizards that they were offended by something, and the wizards would bend over backwards for them. Just because one person finds something offensive doesn't mean it's true or even offensive to others with the same background. Pop quiz. If I said that there's a new race that's depicted with a character in a colorful costume playing a stringed instrument while kicking up a leg and jamming out, am I describing a black person or a 67-year-old Australian guitarist? That's right. Hadozi are based on AC/DC because look at them. Well, maybe not Chris Slade. Definitely not Chris Slade. But the rest of them, sure. You can find something to compare anything to, and probably more than one comparison can be made. Just because there's a similarity doesn't mean it's anything more than a passing resemblance, unless you're putting way more than you should into it. If the background is a clear homage to another story, then don't try to work anything more into it. If I say the setting is filled with pale, misanthropic humanoids that are hostile to outsiders inside their own territory, am I describing Omega Man or Finland? Not everything is a coded message for something offensive. To summarize, the curtains are fucking blue. And if you listen to the complainers, then you get the morons that griped that the Tomb of Annihilation didn't do Africa justice in the 30-page section on Chult that started the adventure. It was an adventure, not a source book. And it was Chult, not Africa. And you're not getting the history of Africa summarized in 30 pages. Here's a little secret. Anybody of any race can write a decent article or adventure based on another culture. Do your research, listen to your editor, and make sure it's interesting or fun. We have pen names for a reason. Hire people based on their ability and competence. Everything else is a distraction. I can go out and hire a dozen southpaws to write all the lefty anthology where every author is sinister. But if they can't write worth a flip, then the exercise is pointless. If you advertise a book based on the physical characteristics of the authors, you're making me question their competence. I would point out the writing talents and past works of Michael Pondsmith and Malcolm Harris long before I would bring up their skin tone or handedness. One thing I will say in defense of Tomb of Annihilation, at least the art was different. 5e has this art style that has niggled at me for the longest before an artist finally explained to me what the problem is. It's Victorian. Not just in dress, granted almost everyone is clad neck to ankle and finding a bare shoulder is quite the challenge, but nobody ever seems to be in any danger. It's boring, safe, and a bit bland. No matter where the characters are set, everyone has the same fashion sense. Eberron gets a pass because a huge chunk of the art is warforged, but it's hard to tell Ravenloft and Forgotten Realms apart based on who's wearing what. Even Ghosts of Saltmarsh doesn't give a distinct appearance to its people. Compared to the older settings where you could tell a Mystara character from a Dark Sun character to the Realms or Dragonlands, real-world cultures compared to post-apocalypse to high fantasy to just more chivalrous looks. The action scenes inspired me in my book to actually have action, rather than just looking like a friendly game of tag. Wizards plays the art very safe. Few characters are ever in any danger. Even in Ravenloft, everything tended to look clean and sterile. Here, you've got Paralyzed Pete, the plucky pistol-packing paraplegic paladin, and his pensive pugilist partner, Polly, passively plugging pernicious puppets. Do they look worried? Or even annoyed? The obvious Wraith lady here is blasting a party crasher and the rest of the scene is static. Like, two people are looking aghast at the scene off to the side and everyone else looks like they've just refilled the shrimp scampi table. And somebody explained to me again how the titular character of Ravenloft doesn't show up on the cover of one of his own books. I know art is subjective. Some people might be fine with the art, except the halflings. What in the name of all that is holy made someone decide that every hobbit, halfling, hin, and shirefolk is based off of Master Billy Quizboy? This is some of the worst depictions of a core race I can think of. There's a lot of art I just found ugly. The introduction edition of the collector's versions came off as a shameless cash grab, and the art there got shinier, but it often got uglier. The Radiant Citadel art looks like something you'd find at a 4th grade book fair. They apparently ran out of every color but pink for the Von Richten's collector's edition. And then you look at the regular version, and let me ask you this. Who is Von Richten and Esmeralda looking at? They're not looking at Strahd. None of the sight lines for any of the characters line up. Esmeralda's staring off into space. Von Richten is admiring the castle's tapestries. And Strahd is yelling at somebody to throw him the ball. It's a minor gripe, but it's something I learned by listening to the artists, and it aggravated an already strained view of the game. Tasha's was the straw that broke the Bodendruger's back. I know it was all supposed to be optional rules, but tell that to a lot of players and commenters online. It was announced that they were removing racial modifiers for races and let you pick what you wanted. That's called kicking it to the classes. Because just about everybody's going to put their +2 in their most important stat. That's right, prime requisites are back, only without the 10% bonus experience. Might as well just say, you're a wizard, add +2 to your intelligence. It's a false choice. You're going to take what gives you the best chance of success. Sure, you could make Tim the Gnome Bard from Hell and deliberately make a character that sucks at literally everything he's supposed to be good at, but that gag gets old quick. And then players get to the build your own race, and the game becomes even more vanilla. That's what finally lost me. I enjoy restrictions on my games. I enjoy world building. I enjoy trying to make something unique with the restrictions given you. If you take those away, you take away the challenge. There's no wrong fun, unless it involves, disagreements over clothing optional games at other people's houses. But watching the game devolve down into people cherry-picking what they want and the classes bleeding together into one flavorless blob that's just going to cast spells regardless of their actual class and race. If that's going to be the game, why not just play GURPS? At least it's a universal system that was designed that way. 5th edition had a lot of promise. They said it was going to be modular. They were going to build on it like the Beckme of old. And it seems like they got lazy or just gave up. They complained about nobody buying books built for DMs, then didn't tell the DMs how to actually create games. Setting books came out feeling incomplete. Adventures were either rehashes of older modules or later mix and match modules that felt like several different adventures welded together, like Rime of the Frost Maiden or Dragon Heist. Instead of standalone modules like previous editions, they turned to anthologies, which gave you a mixed bag that often felt like filler. That leaves me in a quandary. I have most of the 5th edition books. I own 27 of them. All of the adventures, all of the source books, none of the Magic the Gathering crossovers that I had no interest in, and 3 setting guides. And the best one of those 3 I wrote myself. I will put the Mystara Player's Guide up against any of the 5th edition settings in terms of content. Does my soured opinion on 5th edition change this channel's focus regarding Mystara?
Oh, fuck no!
Mystara predates Wizards. Wizards has made exactly 3 articles about Mystara since acquiring it from TSR, and they were all in the same Dragon magazine, and that was written by Paizo. So no, I won't be stopping any of the channels, but I had to get my head clear of all the negativity. So what's next for 5th edition? Who cares? I might grab a few later books when they go on sale out of morbid curiosity. Then they can sit on my shelf of shame alongside 7th C 2nd edition and Iron Kingdoms. Game editions change. Mystara is forever.